covering those. Our presenter tonight, we're going to end where we started with Jeff Mccalla. As you may remember, he is the Assistant Director for Special Collections and University Archivist at the Furman University Libraries. He's written, I'm not going to go through all of his list again, he's written several books and edited books. He's the co-editor of In Dogs We Trust. I like that one. Most important to me is that he is an OLLI instructor and is teaching, he teaches a class every fall called The History of the Book. And he also is the person who came up with the idea for this series. And so we are grateful to him for these fun ideas and for recruiting the speakers he recruited. He did everything, y'all. I just put it in the brochure. So we appreciate you, Jeff, for all of that. And Jeff, I don't know if you know, but we've had some visitors from another OLLI, and they're copying our little idea here. So your idea is going other places. So as y'all probably remember, if you've been before, we are recording this. And so the best way to ask questions is through the chat. And I'm going to spotlight, oh, wait. Yeah, there. Jeff, so that he's the only one we see. And Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for helping make this happen. This has been a lot of fun. And I should acknowledge, of course, if you don't know already, the Frick Collection in New York City did this in the spring, and a lot of OLLI members were enthused by it, and we all watched their cocktails at the Curator. So this is a blatant ripoff. This is not an original idea. We acknowledge them and are thankful for them too. And they're still going, by the way. I'm going to wear my hat tonight as University Archivist, not as Special Collections Curator, and talk a little bit about Furman's early history. And because of that, I want to start off by sharing with you Furman's land acknowledgement statement. A year ago, last November, after a number of conversations with the campus community and with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation, Furman has a partnership and agreed on a land acknowledgement statement. Now these statements are formal policies that the universities adopt. A lot of nonprofits and organizations and universities do this, as well as local government agencies. The concept is very popular in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand especially, in areas that are fairly recently settled by European folks on native land. And it's starting to catch on in North America a little bit as well. So Furman is leading the curve on this in terms of universities. And what a land acknowledgement statement is offered usually when a group of people come onto a campus as visitors, either for a program or a tour or a symposia or an academic conference. Or a dinner, for example. So Furman adopted this last year. The slide you see was created by Gabby Villagran, class of 20, and she created the graphic to go with this statement. It illustrates a river flowing from the mountains of Cherokee into the foothills where Furman is located. Under a new moon, a Cherokee village in the background is lit by the new fire of the traditional Renewal Festival. And this is the statement that Furman has adopted. We acknowledge that Furman University occupies traditional land of the Cherokee people, a land where the Catawba and other indigenous people may have found food. Long before our alma mater sang of the mountain river that laves our mother's feet, the Cherokee honored that water, the land through which it flowed, and all the creatures living on the land with them. From the natural world, they also learned to live and form communities of respect. It is with gratitude that we too honor the land and the people who have stewarded it through many generations. We also must acknowledge that we benefit from the Cherokees' loss of land and commit to remembering the human cost of colonialism. This land acknowledgement challenges us to learn from the Cherokee people and to draw from their wisdom about community, resilience, and the meaning of life which this land nurtured. And you can find that full text on the Furman website as well, along with some pictures and images of the announcement. Okay, so today I want to talk about 19th century South Carolina history and Furman's connections with slavery. Before we start, when I planned this series, I thought, well, by November 13th, we'll have changed our clocks and it'll be dark and cold and stormy, and we'll want something nice and toasty and warm to drink. And of course, today it was about 75 and sunny and beautiful, and I was sweating in my sweater as I was moving around at lunchtime outside. So the Rob Roy, which is a sort of a variant on the Manhattan, using Scotch instead of bourbon. It's a little bit drier, not as sweet, but a lovely cocktail that warms you up. So I have one here in a vintage cocktail glass. I'm using a Glenmorangie 10-year-old, but some people say you shouldn't use a single malt when you make a cocktail, but you use blended whiskey. But a good blend and a good single malt makes for a good cocktail. So I have that, and I'm going to warm myself up with the Rob Roy. So cheers, everyone. Okay. Oops. So Furman, before getting to Greenville in 1851, occupied 3 other campuses around the state of South Carolina. Founded in 1826, we were given an 8-acre site on the edge of Edgefield, down in the sort of west corner of the state near the Georgia border. And we occupied that from 1826 to 1829. We were not a university. So the Baptists founded this Furman Academy and Furman Theological Institution as a compromise. I'm not going to talk too much about Baptist theology. I'll spare you that. But at this time in the early 19th century, since the Baptists were very decentralized, the notion of having an accredited body that grants ministers licenses, a seminary, was still a little bit too radical for them. They felt, and many of the membership felt, that one had a calling in a community, and the community then recognized that calling and raised someone up to the rank of minister. So one didn't need a formal theological training to become a minister. And the Baptists were still a little bit split about that. We'd get a seminary later on in the late 1850s. But in the 1820s, the year after Richard Furman dies, the minister of the First Baptist Church down in Charleston, the oldest Baptist church in the South, and again, one of the sort of unacknowledged leaders of South Carolina Baptists, they gathered together and named this new institution after him. So it operated as a prep school for a year or two, and then as a theological institution, a non-degree granting theological institution that worked on a collegiate model. So that's in 1826 to 1829 over in Edgefield. And for various reasons, which I won't get into today, they moved over to Sumter County, where the Furman family had ties to the east of Sumter City, an area called the High Hills of Santee, and they were there for 5 years. And then in 1830, after some wranglings, they moved to a third site in Winnsboro in 1837, and that's what I want to talk about today a little bit. So they were there for 14 years, and they moved to this place. It's about 20 miles north of Columbia, and in 1837, it was fairly rural. It was a town that had existed for a long time, but it was in the burgeoning cotton belt within South Carolina. After the introduction of the cotton gin, the plantation economy moved full steam ahead, away from indigo and rice in the low country, moving up into the central part of the state, and the consolidation of plantations had begun, and the large-scale production of cotton started in earnest. And Furman moved there with a very distinct purpose. They wanted to create an institution where the students and the faculty devoted some portion of every working day to manual labor, as well as going about their theological and academic tasks. And so that was the impetus. They bought a 557-acre site just to the south of Winnsboro proper. And they instituted a policy where the students would work for 2.5 hours every day, 6 days a week, in addition to their studies, contributing to the labor of the organization, growing food, repairing fences, and doing all that sort of thing. It's an experiment that did not last. It's part of this wave of American utopian communities that started to really flourish in America in the 1830s, with the Baptist tinge in South Carolina. And for reasons which we'll get into in a little bit, it did not work. And in 1851, they moved to the fourth and penultimate campus site in downtown Greenville, just to the south of the Reedy River, where the governor's school and the county office building now stands. I'm gonna advance a little bit forward and then go back to Winsboro and talk about the document that I have to show with you. But in 1851, this period from 1851 to 1865, we have a little bit more records, and we do have, and it's been written about in one of the Furman histories, the monographs that have been written about the history of this university, that any large-scale construction project in South Carolina in 1851 would have likely employed enslaved labor to build it. We know that, and we knew that about Furman. What hasn't been written about extensively until the recent work of our Slavery and Justice Task Force is that the details, basically. It was glossed over in the 1930s when the centennial history of Furman was written. Acknowledged, but not given much detail. And so from documents in the university archives, we have receipts and slips and ledger volumes detailing the construction of the downtown campus for over 4 years. And I have 3 documents up here right now. You can see this is a pay slip to John W. Grady to hire a boy with college buildings from the 27th August to the 23rd of November last, 22 days thereabouts, for the sum of 1754. So this document is paying John W. Grady, or John McGrady, for the hiring in of his enslaved boy. And of course, in 19th century terminology, this could mean quite literally a young enslaved boy, or it could be, a 60-year-old enslaved man. That term was used just generically when someone wasn't named. And so we know that. So we know that even during the construction process and also in the early days of its operation, we hired in enslaved labor to clean and maintain the coal furnaces and keep the grounds after the university buildings were built, but also in the construction. So the middle document here, you see Negroes work making mortar at a certain rate, looks like 44 cents a day for $31.15. And likewise, this third document here, a payment to MacBee's boy. This is Vardry MacBee, the acknowledged sort of founder of Greenville, the largest landowner in Greenville in the 1850s, and an owner of many enslaved people, hiring in his boy for plastering outbuildings at a small amount. So we have these documents. And we also, due to these records now, can acknowledge their names. We know some of the men who contributed their uncompensated labor towards constructing this campus in 1851 to 54. Allen, Cato, Elias, Henry, Jacob, Jim, Joe, Perry, and Titus. And we also know from these ledger documents who their enslavers were and who Furman paid for this labor in town. So there are all sorts of connections now in town that we can further pursue using all the wonderful electronic databases and things and sources we have access to now. So some of this research is going to be ongoing as we start to build a network of connections between townspeople, enslavers, enslaved people, and the construction of the university. One other example quickly, James Pettigrew Boyce, one of the first 4 faculty members of the new university. When we moved to Greenville in 1851, We created an academic program and got a charter from the state to grant degrees. So we became the Furman University. It had a theological component, and it had a collegiate component, and we also had the prep school attached as well. One of the first 4 faculty members was James Pettigrew Boyce, and he later led the movement to found a Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in 1857. He was one of the wealthiest men in Greenville, and a slave owner of many men and women. And this is an excerpt from the journal of a student at Furman who graduated in 1860 named Belton Oscar Malden. And he's writing about the dispersal of his uncle's estate. His uncle had recently died, and the estate was being broken up early in 1860. And here's the entry for January 18th. Uncle Joab's Negroes sold well today. George brought $3,500. This is of national interest right now because of the price. It got national press coverage. He is the best and most sensible Negro I ever saw, a fine millwright, and one of the best carpenters in town. Professor Boyce bought him. He has his wife, father, everybody. Everybody thought it high, the price, that is. Professor B was offered $4,000 tonight for him. And then it goes on, 24 Negroes, including children from 2 to 12 years old, averaged $1,000 or $106, $106 might be the average. A great many people here. And this happened on Main Street in Greenville. So this is the landscape in which this new university in 1851 was being built. You may think that the 19th century reckoning of our history was over, and then we moved on from there in the early and mid 20th centuries. We desegregated in 1965. There are other problematic areas that are also need to be fully thought about and recovered. This is 1963. This is the homecoming issue of the Furman Paladin, and inside they did a full color excerpt. Furman's mascot was the Paladin, the Christian knight on horseback, for football, and then when the new campus was moved here, it was consolidated. We had 3 mascots that moved into one. The horse that the Paladin rode on in 1963, when he made his debut, was called Mighty White Man. So a white horse, Mighty White Man. This was clearly a deliberate effort at naming and provocation in the face of the civil rights movement and everything else that was going on in this country in '63. There are elements of this during the football games from the '60s through the late '80s at the very least, probably a little bit later. Students regularly waved the Confederate flag long after desegregation here. So these incidents follow us forward as part of our historical memory and our historical reckoning. One other item, items that were posted, these plaques, these flyers were posted on our Playhouse doors in April 2018, anonymously in the middle of the night. So these connections run deep here, the connections of white supremacy in and amongst the citizenry of this town and the state, and also within our own faculty and staff and our own legacy. So these are things we're conscious of today, certainly in ways that we weren't in the 1930s when the history of Furman was written, that one that I mentioned, and certainly even 40 or 50 years ago when we started to desegregate. Okay, I want to go back now to Winnsboro in the 1837 to 1850, this farming experiment on 557 acres in the middle of the cotton fields, the cotton belt of South Carolina. And this document here, this manager's biennial report to the Board of Trustees for the year 1839. I'm going to stop my sharing now, and I'm going to move over to the document camera that I have set up where we look at the document itself. Okay. There we go. Can you see that? Good. My hand's moving. We're live. I'm going to take a sip here. So this document, we don't have a lot of early financial records of the university prior to 1900. For various reasons, campus moves and what have you, they don't exist as much. I have a 3-inch box of documents that documents the entire history of the Winnsboro campus experiment over close to 15 years, a tiny amount of what would have existed. No ledgers, no other extended documents. So what this document is, you can see it's a ledger size sheet, partly torn out of a ledger, a little bit bigger than an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It was folded into quarters at one point. Dated, this is docketed July 1839. The document dates to the end of to the early part of 1839. And what this is one of only 4 financial summaries of what was going on this Winnsboro farm experiment at this time. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit closely. Top half is the summary of the receipts and payments. The bottom half is the summary of the debts incurred. So giving the trustees a capsule summary of the financial state of the institution and what was going on over the previous 6 months or so. The campus had hired what they called a steward to basically serve as the overseer of the agricultural operations and the property. There were a couple faculty members in residence. There were a small amount of students, no more than 200 at any one time, enrolled at the school, mostly as boarders, but also as day students. So naturally, here we have documents here, $197.04 received for student board in the year 1838. Sundry articles came in, more student board came in, property sold, they sold off part of it. And of course here, this agricultural experiment, for the sales of cotton, $643.08. So this represents the fall 1838 harvest of cotton on this 557 acre quote unquote farm. It's a plantation that also has an academic institution smack in the middle of it. We know they grew corn and they grew cotton for market, and they also raised hogs. And so here's the cash in hand and the revenues of $1,900, 1905. The bottom half of the document is the series summary of the debts incurred, the expenses. And this is where things get interesting. And here we go. This breakdown here, these lines. The hire of Negroes of Kincaid's estate, $151. Ditto, the hire of Negroes from Cecilia Boyd, now looks like Colonel Lighthouse, so they either married or they transferred over, $146. Likewise, the hire of Negroes from Heather Boyd, $112, of James Boyd, $226, and of Davis Caldwell, $75. So this is one of about 4 documents that we have in our possession that itemizes the fact that the Furman Academy and Theological Institution was hiring in enslaved labor from the local plantations and plantation owners to work the fields of cotton and corn. Given the amount of the size of the student body and the size of the faculty at that time, they weren't running a 557 acre plantation themselves. They were raising crops for profit and to sell, and they needed hired in labor to do that. And now we can tell, and also given the amount of time, we can estimate the rough size of the enslaved labor force that was working for Furman on this agricultural plantation. And if you do the rough math here, these figures, 5 of them, add up to over $643.08, which is the amount of revenues from the fall harvest of cotton. So this agricultural experiment was ultimately losing money. It was not successful. The students didn't like it. These were, young men from rural South Carolina. Some of them were from urban environments. And they were training to become Baptist ministers for the most part. They were getting that training. They would be preachers and teachers, leaders of their communities, right? And after 3.5 years, they finally rebelled against the manual labor requirement. They would go off into Winsboro and get drunk and raise hell, come back, and they burned down the wooden dorm, or the wooden dorm burned down at one point 3 years in, out of an act of deliberate sabotage, we don't know. But the brick buildings that I showed you on that previous slide were built afterwards, after the wooden frame buildings did not last. And so after 3 years, Furman stopped the manual labor requirement for its students, and it became just a conventional theological institution, a proto-college. But the farming continued, and so I can document some of this from the period 1838 to 1841 or so, and after that, for 10 years, it basically continued apace, though we don't have documentary evidence like this. So Furman was running a plantation, basically, in Winsboro, South Carolina for about 14 years. There are about 6 histories of Furman University that have been written, and 5 of them cover the 19th century. One of them was written by one of my predecessors, several times removed. I can only, sorry, I'm going back here. There we go. I'm going back to me again. I'm stopping the screen share. I can only assume that since these documents were here and have been here in the university archives, that every one of those academics and researchers and my predecessor who wrote the histories of this university and its various campuses and experiments had access to these documents, but they chose not to use them or to summarize them or to consider them in all those histories. The only documented evidence that has been conveyed in a secondary history of the university comes from Daniel's Centennial History, where he mentions in a paragraph debates over the hiring of enslaved labor to build the downtown Greenville campus in 1851. So these documents existed. You know, they haven't been hidden in the archives. They haven't been concealed. They've been here and we've known about them. They've been shared in classes. They've been taught from. Certainly I have for the past 5 years. But the official histories of this university have not acknowledged that. They have not documented this. They have not named the names of the enslavers or the enslaved people who helped build our campus. And also within the larger Baptist community in South Carolina, from which our endowment lies, and our earliest funding comes from the uncompensated labor of enslaved people in the state. So this is part of our legacy, this is part of our heritage, and this is part of the things that we are trying to reckon with right now as a campus, as a community, and also be more open and upfront about teaching with. These documents are all on the Furman Library's digital collection site. We have a separate collection called Furman's Legacy of Slavery. We did a full exhibit after the task force report came out 2 years ago. And we are doing what we can to make sure that these documents are known better and are widely acknowledged by our students and known as we go forward doing and implementing all the recommendations of the Slavery and Justice Task Force going forward, construction of which is happening right outside my window here on the plaza in front of the library, where we're about to unveil a statue of Joseph Vaughn, our first African-American undergraduate from 1965. So I'll stop there. I'm at time. Some of these documents, again, are up on the Furman Library's website, up on the Special Collections website, digital collections, the report of the Slavery and Justice Task Force, and the appendices that document what our trustees and other people have been doing afterwards to implement some of these recommendations. Furman's going to have a centennial in 2026, coming up in 6 short years. So I'm hoping we can commission a new, thorough inclusive history of this university, a true bicentennial history, to be brought out and written, and we're working on getting that underway too. So we will have some documents to read and to study more and to think about and to teach with. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your time, everybody. I'm happy to field questions along the way too.
Thanks, Jeff. You know, as people are sending their questions in the chat, I'll just say that as a Furman graduate, I'm interested in, I always knew Furman had been other places, but it was interesting to learn more about where those places were and why we moved around. I'm also glad that by the time I was a student, we weren't having to do 2.5 hours of labor outside. And I'm always interested when you and others have presented through this series, how you can take this piece of paper and learn so much history from it. It's just interesting to see how that process works. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. We do have a question. Will there be an effort to memorialize the slaves who helped build the university?
In some ways, yes. So I'm part of a trustee and faculty committee right now that's working on language for the Joseph Vaughn Plaza out front that's going to be etched in the granite steps, and also in a new plaque that's going on to Cherrydale, which is our alumni house, which was James C. Furman's plantation house down the road where the Ingalls Shopping Center is right now. They gave it to Furman, and Furman moved it up the road in the early 90s and put it up and turned it into our alumni house. James C. Furman owned, and he was our first president, Richard Furman's son, in 1851. He had over 600 acres and was known to have enslaved over 50 people on the period 1851 to 1865. And we know some of their names. And they're the names of the enslaved people who lived and worked against their will at Cherrydale are going to be part of the new plaque that's going to be up outside that building. And I've been working this week going back and forth on language for that plaque before it gets cast. So yes, absolutely, we are taking some steps to acknowledge this. One of our dorms on campus has been renamed the Clark Murphy Housing Complex. Clark Murphy was an enslaved man who worked at the Baptist Female College, and then after the war was a salaried employee there. And then Furman merged with that, the Women's College, in the 1930s. So the legacy of the women's dorm that was the legacy of the Women's College is now being named after Clark Murphy. So yes, we are acknowledging this.
Then another question, what brought about Furman's decision to explore and publish the truth about its history with slavery?
Well, a couple things happened. This was maybe about 4 years ago now when our process started in earnest. We're aware of national movements, so Yale and Brown, Harvard, University of Virginia, William and Mary had done similar movements. It's the way in which historical analysis has been going, looking at institutions and connections and economic histories of institutions going back to the 18th century. And so those campuses form self-study groups. At Furman's campus, a wonderful student named Marion Davies took a class in Furman history and saw some disconnects between the plaques that we currently have on campus and the people and what they did and what they also did that wasn't terribly acknowledged, and wrote an op-ed in the Furman Paladin saying, why are we not doing anything more? And that culmination of efforts of a number of people led to the formation of our task force on slavery and justice. This was in 2017, I think. It was a group of faculty, staff, and students who spent a year sort of pulling together these resources. I was on that group. We had historians and sociologists and a number of very active students who helped us with this. And that kicked off a larger movement on campus of a number of groups. And other things happened nationally. The Charlottesville race riot happened a year after that. All the universities who are currently doing this have formed a coalition called the University Studying Slavery Consortium. And they've been having annual and biannual conferences where we've been sharing the results of our work. Clemson has been doing it, and they're in the news fairly recently. The University of South Carolina has done some serious work as well with recontextualizing some of the buildings on their campus. So this is a national movement, and Furman sort of came in on the second wave of this, but we've done it in a very interesting and kind of open and honest way that maybe some of our public institutions where trustees or political appointees could not have done in quite the same way or with the same degree of sort of hard truth telling, I think, that Furman did. So it's been very interesting work and very rewarding work. And it's started a whole group of other classes that are being taught using some of this material in American history and literature and a number of other areas. So we're still learning a lot more, actually, and that's the wonderful part, that there are all these side projects that have been coming out of this work where we're going to be able to learn more. I'm about to hire a professional archivist to work for 2 years building and connecting all these little pieces and projects together, working primarily on race and Furman history as well, and digital scholarship. So yes. I'll stop.
Okay, well, we're a little bit over time, but we'll get these last two questions in, which, well, they're different. So given those notes on the door that were mentioned in the beginning, is there backlash to Furman's attempt to memorialize slavery or to think about some of these things? And are there discussions of restitution?
There hasn't been much backlash, no. We set up an email account that could field anonymous questions to the committee along the way and recommendations. There's a website, there's a blog with comments. We didn't really run into that. Most of the feelings we've had amongst all of our alumni of every generation have said, yeah, we should acknowledge this, we should study it, and we should be more open and honest about it. Not saying anything or alluding to something without really having the full access to documentary evidence is silly. So no, we haven't had much feedback, not much negative feedback at all, and certainly no pushback. I think we did a survey of all the named spaces and the public statues and the sculptures and the paintings on this campus, and we did a racial breakdown of how they represent our current faculty and staff and student bodies, and quite unsurprisingly, it was 99% white on the representations on this campus. And so we have to ask ourselves, and our trustees as well, we ask them, how would you feel as a Furman undergraduate, as a student of color, when seeing all these representations of people who are not like yourself? How would you feel? Do you feel like you belong on this place and are truly a part of this community? And then we ask the students the same questions, and they shared their honest reactions to our trustees. And our trustees were very moved and surprised, I think, at the way our students of color talked honestly about their experiences here on campus. So this has been really uniformly embraced, maybe with a little bit of skepticism among certain parts of the community, but for the most part, we have all gone forward fairly well together, and it's sort of a remarkable thing. What was the second question?
Discussions of restitution.
Yeah, we're not talking about restitution. We're not talking about reconciliation, because what do white people have to reconcile? It's not the same thing when we talk about that. The words we've been using has been reckoning. White people need to reckon with this legacy in a way. But one of a number of recommendations of the task force was to devote financial resources towards some form of reckoning. And what they did, the trustees immediately embraced, was the increase of our Joseph Vaughn Scholarship, which goes towards students from South Carolina coming from mostly underprivileged financial backgrounds that they skew towards students of color. The trustees have committed $1 million in new scholarship money, given out $250,000 a year over 4 years, and we've just instituted that towards the scholarship, and that's going to change the lives of 50 plus Furman students. And they've also committed to securing endowment money to give that same $250,000 payout every year towards the scholarship money continuing in the future. So that is serious money that can and will change the lives of students of color in this state who want to come to Furman and otherwise couldn't. So I think we're going in the right direction towards that.
Okay, well, that wraps up our questions, and we are again very grateful to you for your presentation today and for putting this whole series together. I think we are certain that we've had lots of people enjoy it, so that is great. I will tell you all that you can watch your Ollie Notes in December. We will be having an announcement for our Read and Explore with Ollie book for 2021. This is the 5th year we've had our big read. So that will be sort of our special extra events through the winter term. We're going to have hopefully an author visit and some other related programming connected to that book. And then we'll see what happens in the spring, but maybe there'll be something special then too as well. So thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend, and we will see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bravo.
Thank you, Nancy.
Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bravo.
Thank you all for coming. Okay, well, that was great, Jeff. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. My pleasure.
And I will say, I was a Furman student from 86 to 90, and I don't remember any Confederate flags at the football games by then.
The dean of the faculty was strongly discouraging students in the 60s and 70s from doing that.
Oh, I'm sure.
And maybe by the 80s, it finally kind of.
Yeah. Now, I know that's kind of the symbol for the KA fraternity, but by the time I was here, the KAs had like 5 members, and I'm not sure they even made it to class most days. They were, so I'm not saying it wasn't there, but I don't remember that, because I would have wondered, that's not our mascot. Why are they doing that? I don't remember that happening. So,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
But all very interesting. So thank you so much. I hope you have a nice weekend.
Yes, and you too, Nancy.
Thank
Here's
you.
a big sigh of relief. Your term is over.
Oh, yes. We did it. Now we know we
Totally
can't
did it.
We're excited about the winter term, so I think it'll go well.
All right. Take care,
Thank
Nancy. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.